But thank you very much, everyone, for joining us for this webinar, which is being run by the Bristol Hub for Gambling Harms Research at the University of Bristol. I'm Sharon Collard, I'm the Hub's co-director. And for those of you who don't know about the Bristol Hub for Gambling Harms Research, we were set up in July 2022 with a £4 million grant from the national charity Gamble Aware. And the idea behind the hub is that we build capacity in gambling harms research, both here in the University of Bristol, but also across the UK and globally. And so this webinar series is part of our of the activities that we undertake. We also promote gambling harms research among academics from a whole range of disciplines. And the idea is really to encourage academics who perhaps wouldn't normally engage in gambling harms research to really take that into their own fields and disciplines, so that we can expand capacity both in terms of the subject knowledge, but also in terms of methodology and the types of partnerships and relationships that we have. So I'm really pleased to be here today to introduce our colleagues who are going to be presenting at our webinar today. So we've got Adrian Webb. Welcome, Adrian. Delighted to have you with us. Adrian is currently a PhD student at the University of Exeter. He has a long work history in working in financial services and also technology, and continues some of those roles now in terms of advising startup companies. So a really interesting background, Aid, that you bring to this discussion. And also delighted to welcome Dr. Dimitris Pinotsis. And Dimitris is Associate Professor at the Centre, I'm going to have to read it out, the Centre for Mathematical Neuroscience and Psychology at City University in London. And he's also the head of the Computational Neuroscience and Psychiatry Lab there. And in addition to that, Dimitris is also a research associate, research affiliate at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And Dimitris has got a really interesting background in maths and theoretical physics, so really interesting. The hub is all about interdisciplinary research, so this is a great example of that. And they're going to talk to us today about online bleaching of websites as a harm reduction intervention. Now, I have to say, this is a subject I know nothing about at all, so I'm really interested to hear what your research is about. So, Aid, I think you're going to start by...
Over to me, yeah. I'm calling this an introduction to Project Monochrome for reasons that will become clear. And thank you, Sharon, for the introduction, which covers some of that. The personal introduction's also been done. There's Dimitris is a great deal cleverer than I am, and has indeed worked with some of my heroes in sort of cognitive science and neuroscience. But for me, when we talk about research today, a lot of what you will hear is not from my academic research. It's from 30 years being in charge of very large marketing departments during the era of sort of online performance marketing. So, you know, in a previous role, I had a marketing budget of £37 million, and that is relatively small compared to a lot of the budgets that people have to increase the performance of their online websites, because obviously it costs a great deal less to run a website than it does to run a chain store. And so enormous focus goes into what is known as performance marketing. And clearly what we're talking about today is what happens when performance marketing gets into online gambling. The research hypothesis of this, and it's really a proposal, because Dimitris and I are proposing a piece of once-for-all robust research that seeks to investigate how reducing cognitive arousal and engagement, which is offered to problem gamblers by sort of operators, apps and websites, will reduce if you change the design experience offered to them. So the success of the sort of reverse techniques of this is evidence from everything I've been speaking about in the commercial world, from very widespread commercial online optimization and performance marketing techniques, some of which I'll show you today. I have to swear you to secrecy because it's no, I don't. You can use it however you like, but this is secret stuff. This is what people sort of keep as their special formula for driving sort of sales and shareholder value. If backed by the research that we propose, it will open the way for some very, very effective interventions. One of which is consumer and browser side bleaching tools, and all this will become clear. And the second is regulatory imposition of design changing code. Now, the reason this is important is because they both circumvent what we found in a previous life, Dimitris and I working together, was the typical workarounds that operators have to any proposed solution to the problem of online gambling and problem gamblers in that space. So the original research we did back in 2020 came off the back of a UKRI grant in financial services that Dimitris and his team also helped us with. And this was based on the hypothesis that if a gambler is in a hot state, they're in a high state of arousal. And so there is a likelihood that you might be able to see some of that change of state from changes in their mouse movements. So changes in their scrolling, changes in their clicking speed and frequency, the moving backwards and forwards between pages, and the passing over of key warnings. So interstitial warnings that are popped up to warn people of the dangers they are facing, closed within a quarter of a second, but also the way that the mouse moves between things very fast, as if the person is in a state of agitation. We did a great deal of research on this and found that there were good links between sort of vulnerability and the kinetic signatures which you see, but to get that kinetic data required something that websites call full on-session data, which means the full recording of what is happening to the mouse rather than just when the mouse takes an action. We put this together into a proposal for operators and began to move this around the industry. And the initial welcome was incredibly warm, which surprised me. I thought there would be a sort of a very poor reaction to it, but there was initial very warm welcome. There was followed up with commitments to meetings, which important people seem to come to. In those meetings was reiterated the commitment to harm reduction. And then we would talk about what the method is, and then there would be new meetings, and then there'll be new attendees, and then there'll be agreements to sort of investigate next steps in principle. And then inevitably what seemed to happen was there were role changes, or somebody would say there are technical issues, or sort of IT priorities had got in the way and things had changed. And what we found was there was this sort of never-ending cycle where nothing actually got to happen. There was a lot of sort of agreement in principle. There was a lot of lip service, but very little happened. And we really pinned it down to the fact that the solution we were offering involved them to make technical changes to their website architecture and the way they deliver their gambling propositions online. So the next step was apart from sort of profound disappointment and a degree of disillusionment with the industry, was to try and look at ways to get around this. Now, one of the things that is really key to everything I'm going to say today is that part of the research we did before was a very large scale comparative linguistic analysis of the verbatim comments of both problem gamblers and the relatives of problem gamblers. So we reached an agreement to be able to sort of scrape anonymized data from GamCare, Gambling Help Online, Gamblers Anonymous, Gambling Therapy, and interestingly Mumsnet, which proved to be one of the biggest sources of parents sort of talking about problems with children who had gambling issues. And we noticed, it's a long report and I'll very happily share it with anybody who's interested, but what the comparative linguistic analysis did was look at periods of time and find out whether certain phrases had risen in the amount of times they were mentioned in this corpus, and also the proximity of terms to each other. So if the word trigger appeared, what were words that appeared in high frequency next to the word trigger? And you can see here, one of the key things we found was that the word boredom was 16.8 times more likely to be referenced in conversations where the word trigger was used in the accumulated content. And the word escape was 31.2 times more likely to be referenced in conversations for gamblers than in the Mumsnet forum. So two things to draw from that. One is that boredom is being referenced as a trigger for gambling very often, and the second, that the problem gamblers were seeing their activity as a form of escape, whereas their parents didn't really see it that way. They saw it as a problem. One of the issues with, sorry, I missed over one there. Another thing that really jumped out at us was the problem with the phrase that the gambling industry has adopted for so long, which is when the fun stops, stop. One of the key issue here is that the idea that the fun is stopping with a poor outcome is misplaced. That the fun actually seems to be mapped onto the experience of gambling, the escape from boredom, the fact that they are doing something exciting rather than something boring. And on the left, I put a verbatim here, which really it's a tragic one, but it really jumped out at me. Is from a scratch card addict, basically saying that he would end up spending huge amounts of money on scratch cards each day, and he said, but I only get the fun ones. That's the lie I keep telling myself, the ones that take a while to do. And one of the aspects that jumped out is what defines a fun scratch card, and in fact what defines a fun gambling experience, one that might provide a bit of escape from boredom. Is it a function of the actions and outcomes of winning, or of taking particular actions, or is it also a function of the design and presentation of the content? Now, I've seen from your previous webinars that a lot of this has been done from the academic side, and what I'm now keen to do is to present it from with one of my old hats on, performance marketing, of how you might look at this from a commercial and intervention side. So if you were able to create a design-based intervention to reduce gambling harms, there are three key elements of app and website optimization that operators will use all the time. Those three elements are the semantic content, which is the words and images on the screen and the meanings those import. The navigation semiotics, and this is a very dark area that I'll come back to in a moment, which is really the lexicon of navigation and the color of the buttons and the journey flow that people go through. But the third one is design, color, sound, and motion. So the key salience, valence, engagement cues. And interestingly, these are the only elements that retain the degree of local or centralized control. The semantic content and the navigation, there's nothing you can do on your own computer to change that, really. But the way that it looks, there are elements that you can change locally. So hold that in mind as we go through the next couple of bits. The key motivation for this, and this may be something you're aware of already, but for those who aren't, I will tell you a bit more about it, is that in 2024, Google Chrome will become the final browser to remove completely tracking cookies from website functionality. Now, I've pointed a little arrow down there. So the other day I was looking at electric cars, and what happens now, even if I go to the Times, electric cars will follow me everywhere through the internet. This is one of the fundamental basis of performance marketing, and has been for the last 10 years. A cookie on your computer can tell somebody all sorts of things about you, but also where you have last come from, what your browsing history is, where you go to after leaving that, what you were looking at, how long you were looking at it for. Huge amounts of data in tracking cookies. A lot of people, when they click accept all cookies, are not realizing that in fact the amount of data they are giving away is extraordinary. This has led to this tracking industry, and that's going to end next year. The problem is that gets rid of tracking and retargeting activity that's core to the online solicitation, particularly for gambling companies. What gambling companies know very well is that anybody who tries to exit themselves from the gambling experience, a bit like we found with scratch cards in garages, is that when the advert keeps appearing for them, for not having placed the bet or to entice them back into a gambling environment. It's almost impossible for them to escape that online trigger all the time following them around. So that's going to disappear, which is a good thing. The problem is it's creating a whole new industry, which I believe is going to be not just worse, but catastrophic for online gambling. Let me just take you through that a moment. So the zero-party data, which is effectively you can use cookies for the experience within a visit to a website or an app or whatever, but you cannot use it for tracking. The industry predictions is this going to cause a rise of consensual data trading, which is, in other words, we can't place a cookie on your system, but what we'll offer you is an incentive or a game or a quiz or something. And in exchange for that, you agree to give us personal information about your habits and what you do. And if you enter enough information, you get to play the game for free. So sports clubs and brands are already finding very high levels of engagement with this and very high levels of data extraction with it. And all of it tends to be followed up then with targeted incentives, knowing something from the consensual data. So in gambling, the loss of revenue from retargeting will be sought from even more aggressive optimization on the website, but also in this zero-party gamification, which will use stronger triggers and stronger incentives. So one of my frustrations with the sort of regulation of gambling and also the approaches that are being taken is too much of it is when the problem has already occurred, and the problem is occurring predominantly in online environments. So we need more emphasis on prevention. So here's an example of a large company out there already offering this to sports companies, next level gamification, rewarding experiences that drive loyalty and growth. Targeting the fun, the escape and the boredom reduction is key to trigger to problem gambling, as I explained earlier. Now, just a very quick run through of digital optimization, how it works. The empirical basis of large scale performance marketing is pure conversion data. In other words, how many people who you target through particular methods like cookie resolicitation enter your website, and then how many of those go through and complete an action or a purchase at the end of it. At each stage, there's drop off, and these are mapped against what the marketing funnel calls, attention, interest, consideration, intent, and action. Neurodesign is really mapping this to a sort of cognitive funnel that maps those to the types of design changes or the nudges that you might make during the course of that funnel to enhance performance. So neuromarketing is alive and well, and this is what is at the basis of a great deal of performance marketing. Now, just to give you a couple of really interesting live environments. So here's two examples of what you would call neurodesign. If you look on the top left, there's two competing adverts for baby products. What you see is the intensity of the gaze. If you have a baby's face staring straight out at the camera, just through evolutionary principles, all of our attention is sucked towards the face, and so there's not so much focus on the lettering and the words on the right. If you then have a look at the right-hand version where the baby is looking at the picture, our gaze following instinct means that there's very high levels of engagement with the things that the baby is looking at. Exactly the same with the one on the bottom. You see that the eye goes first of all to the face, and then it will go to this thing that's attaching this athlete to the heading, and so it yields a very, very high focus on the wording there. This is the sort of techniques that are used, eye tracking, galvanic skin response, all of the above. The other one is there is a lot of sort of mapping of color palettes to what impression you want to give of your products. None of this will be the least bit surprising to any of you, I imagine, but this is there are people who are hired out to specialize in palettes for persuasion, really, for marketing. Tying some of that together, we end up with website optimization linked to what is known in the trade as dark patterns or sludge. The top one is a sort of 3 examples of sort of dark patterns, which is that green has cognitively for us the idea of go and red for stop. So when you switch those round, you have a degree of sort of cognitive confusion over what's going on there. The one on the right-hand side, close account, is very interesting because I've grayed that out and I've made it look like it's non-clickable. We've been around the online universe long enough to know that things that are grayed out don't tend to be clickable. So when gambling operators or indeed virtually any company wants you not to take an action, they now start rendering that in grey because it looks like it's not an available option to them. Your little hand will appear as it goes over it, but for you cognitively, you start thinking, well, what do I do? The other one is questions which you just can't really work out. Would you like to close your account or keep it open? Cross tick. Which of those do you click? We've seen those before. The third one, very interesting, open account and continuous guest. The vast amount of people don't want to be tracked, so they click continuous guest. But when you continue as guest, you get a very high conversion, but actually you give all the same data. And at the end, it says, would you just like to keep track of your product that you've just ordered just by click this and you create an account? So virtually everybody who goes continuous guest ends up creating an account, but you get higher conversion because people think they're not being tracked so much. The bottom one is the most pernicious. This happens in the gambling industry. You decide to cut your losses and to withdraw the money that's in your account. And if you return, you'll find it takes 48 hours for your money to appear, but there is a button that says reverse withdrawal. And the clicking of reverse withdrawal is one of the key ways for gambling operators to ensure that people who are going to leave them come back. That 48-hour lag is false. It doesn't take 48 hours to transfer that, but they know that if people return, they're more than likely to click reverse withdrawal. The other one, I don't know if you can see it up here, is this little tiny X in the top left-hand corner. So YouTube Premium will put this tiny little grey X in there so you can hardly see it. So it looks like you've only got one option, which is to take out YouTube Premium. So gambling design rests strongly on colour vibrancy. So you can see here the sort of palette that is used by a gambling operator to sort of enliven our eyes and make us think this looks like fun. And that sort of functionality, if we want to control the content or the navigation, as I said earlier on, that's very hard. But design interventions are actually very easy. Partly because all websites hinge on what's called cascading style sheets, which is where you have a single simple file that controls the design of virtually everything on a website. So if you want to change your website overnight, you just change the CSS file and every page updates its design. So it allows for the separation of content and presentation, so layout, colors and fonts, from what is actually on the page. The other design intervention is accessibility, which is usually targeted at visual impairment, but allows for a sort of overarching changes to presentation for other means, usually to increase readability for those who are visually impaired. So simple message of this slide is that actually there's a lot that the gambling operators during our first phase said they couldn't do. This is something which, even if they can't do it, the user can do it. There are ways for this to happen on the user side. So the easy version of this is that single line of code, if put into a CSS file of a gambling operator, would reduce the entire journey to grayscale. On an Apple computer, inside your accessibility, there's a thing called color filters, grayscale, which will reduce your everything on your screen to grayscale. So the hard version of bringing about an intervention that is based on reducing things to grayscale is you could have a freely available browser plugin offered to anybody to install on their browser that is triggered to bleach the pages of a gambling operator to grayscale. It would remove the gambling operator's control over color, font, motion, and sound optimization, which is used to keep people online. It could even be a regulatory mandated cascading style sheet code for implementation post login only to gamblers who have previously experienced problems. So take this segment and you have to show them a grayscaled environment. So a quick practical demonstration, if I may. I don't know if you can all see me on the screen there, but I'm going to very quickly take you to the Unibet website here. Okay. And I'm going to log into it, and I'm going to find the sort of slot machines, casino, something like that. And you'll see on here plenty of bright color. I'm now going to do this, and I hope this works. Oh, that didn't work. Just 2 seconds. The cookie thing came up. I have now grayed that entire app. Everything I click on there will appear only as gray. Okay. Now, just before I go to Dimitris, the proposal is, we know that in online marketing and performance marketing, that design and design experience is a key element of arousal and engagement. We want to test this with a research proposal, and at the very beginning of it, it's key that we really have a neuroscientific underpinning, and particularly sort of, you know, how it differs between different cohorts of problem gamblers, leisure gamblers, etc. But for that, I'm actually going to take a break and turn you over for about 15 minutes to my colleague Dimitris. I'll stop my share, Dimitris.
Thanks, Ade. Yeah, and I'll try to share my screen. Can you see my screen? Ade? Yep.
Yep.
We can see it. Thanks, Dimitris.
Thank you. The way we approach these neuromarketing questions is by taking ideas from computational psychiatry, which is the study of mental diseases and disorders using tools from psychology, neuroscience, and artificial intelligence and computer science. So taking ideas from mental disorders like depression, anxiety, and moving them to, you know, to the gambling world and the neuromarketing world. So that's the way we approach problems. And our particular, let's say, focus is what are the neurobiological drivers that underlie vulnerability, problem behavior, in this case, problem gambling. So this is what the focus will be here. And I'll try to present some more, you know, evidence or some arguments in support of our hypothesis in this project. So our hypothesis, as Ade very nicely outlined and motivated, is that we can reduce problem gambling and harm to vulnerable individuals by changing design elements of the website. Very simple stuff that relate to salience features. And here, for simplicity, I will discuss mainly color and this bleaching intervention, this monochrome intervention that Ade motivated. So my argument will be twofold, and it will be both behavioral and neuroscientific. The first part of the argument is that problem gambling is linked to elevated states of arousal or some arousal pathologies. And the second part of the argument is that color is also linked to arousal. So we take these two arguments together. If we change design and salience features and color, we can also reduce problem gambling. And like I said, I'll discuss both behavioral results and neuroscience results, and show how they are combined together, which is really the focus of work we do also in computational psychiatry, from mental disorders and problem behavior to the neurobiological drivers, and parcellating the space of problem behaviors and linking it to different dysfunctions and pathologies in the brain. So what is arousal, first of all? As most of you, a quick reminder. as most of you know, is an elevated state of alertness and attention, which is physiological, which is bodily state. And it results or better information processing and cognitive performance. Often it also has some other side effects, and crucially, as a physiological state, it can be measured with physiological indices like heart rate, skin conductance response, and in earlier work in my lab and also in the laboratory with Aid, we have looked at all this. And what, as I'm sure most of you are well know very well, gambling seems to be linked to this especially elevated arousal state, this high. So there's this old study I mentioned here by Coventry and Constable over 20 years ago, who manipulated the patterns of wins and losses and showed that those problem gamblers who experienced early wins, they were more likely to continue playing. Also, another study has measured physiological indices, again, very early study by Blazinski and colleagues. Horse race gamblers showing different endorphin levels. So it's well known and established in the literature that problem gamblers and gamblers in general seek to become more aroused. They're action seekers, and Aid talked very in great detail about this, as well as there's this other group, again, of problem gamblers, the so-called reducers, who suffer from comorbidities, anxiety, stress disorders, something we also study in the lab for different reasons. And for them, gambling is a way out in a different manner than the action seekers, so to produce states of dissociation. So disengaging from this high stress and anxiety state, and they seek low arousal states. And interestingly, both groups would benefit from low arousal states. So if we were to come up with an intervention, it would be to lower arousal effectively. And this would benefit not only the action seekers, but also the reducers. And I'll come to that and how color, for example, and other salience features could help that. But let me first also revisit some of our earlier work with Aid, where we found, and Aid mentioned some of this work, I have some other examples here. We found, first of all, ways of identifying these elevated arousal states in problem gamblers, and also using these indices that we found, right? So we picked the right features, and I'll come to this, what these features are in a second. But then we can use these features to predict in a cohort who is a vulnerable individual versus not, versus the general population. So what we found is increased speed of interactions, for example, with a gambling website, and also more conflicted interactions. So increased speed means more frequent bets. Conflicted interaction means, for example, re-editing the betting amount. And also this also seemed to have a contextual effect. So the more these individuals gambled and stayed engaged in the gambling environment, the more they increased their speed of betting, for example. So it was sensitive to contextual effects, the markers we found. Another, so these were some behavioral work we did. We also did some machine learning work, again, using a particular kind of behavioral markers called kinetic indices. So again, we had individuals interacting with gambling websites, and we measured, like Aid mentioned, the mouse clicks and the mouse movements and their typing speed to certain questions. And we had a reverse intervention paradigm compared to what we're suggesting now. So here we're suggesting let's try to lower arousal. There we excited, in this earlier study, we excited people. And we measured changes in these kinetic indices before and after the trigger. So we had a gamified task as a reverse intervention, and then we increased arousal. And we found some kinetic markers that changed. And some of these features, the typing speed to some questions relating to emotional state of the individual, which is what you see here, the typing speed, these were predictive of the vulnerable individuals, of the problem individuals. So the color in this plot that you see, first of all, each row corresponds to different kinetic markers. Different colors correspond to changes. How sensitive were these markers before and after the trigger, the intervention. And then the horizontal axis relates to how predictive, how useful were these features for predicting vulnerable individuals. And the more you go to the left here, the negative values, it means that they were more predictive. So the typing speed, the speed of interacting and answering some questions, this and how this changed before and after the trigger, this allowed us to isolate and find the outliers, the problem individuals, the most vulnerable individuals here. But why is gambling linked to arousal, right? Like I said, we want to go now from behavior to the neurobiology. And for this, I will refer to a study some years ago, 10 years ago, by Balodis and colleagues, who put some individuals in a scanner, in an fMRI scanner, functional magnetic resonance imaging scanner. And while these people were in this dark environment, they showed some videos to them. And the videos were from people interacting in casinos and playing games. They were actors. The videos were 4 minutes long. So this is the design at the bottom here that you see of the experiment. And the crucial thing is that they record the behavior and brain activity. So there was a baseline period, then the video began. The video, again, was people playing roulette or blackjack, and after a little bit of time, the video was, like I said, 4 minutes long. They instructed the participants that while they're watching the video, they had to respond, and respond about two things: how motivated they were to gamble themselves while watching the video and thinking that they are in a casino environment, and also how happy or sad they were. So there was gambling urge and emotional responses that they were recorded by clicking buttons and frequency and intensities of button clicks. And then these intensities were taken and compared to activation from different brain areas. And there was a link between the two, which is shown here. And the link was only for pathological gamblers and not the general population. And what is the link? That the intensity of subjective reports, if you see my cursor here, for gambling urge and emotion, measured by button clicks, correlated with the level of activity in certain areas of the temporal lobe, which is associated with language processing, but also affective responses, and is part of an emotional network. In particular, this area here, the temporal pole, which is the edge of the temporal lobe. So the higher the activity measured with fMRI, remember people are in the scanner now, the higher the activity that was measured at the single subject level was, the higher their self-responses to gambling urge and happy emotions were. So the areas that related to the processing of emotions, and in particular emotional memories, and the activity there correlated with basically the gambling behavioral effects, and how much and what was the urge and the motivation for people to gamble, only for pathological gambling. So there is some kind of neural underpinning to gambling and problem gambling behavior identified in these particular areas. So that's the first argument, right? That problem gambling is linked to arousal. The other thing is how color affects arousal, and is well known from color psychology. I'm sure many of you know it, that color results in different cognitive performance. For example, athletes perform better if they wear red versus blue clothes. Colors in classrooms have an effect on student performance, and all this effect can be mediated by the link between color and arousal, and also impulsiveness or impulsivity. People have explicitly tested that in behavioral studies, like this recent one by Xia et al., who showed psychometric tests, logical ability, detail task, spatial awareness tasks, analytic or numerical tasks. So the same task that measures analytical abilities of the individual presented to the same individual with different background colors in the background. And what they found is here is they measured, of course, how well the people performed and how fast they performed, as usual, response times and error rates. Error rate goes from low, the left here, the horizontal axis, to high on the right-hand side of the horizontal axis, and also the response time is on the vertical axis, goes from the top slow to the bottom quick. And they found this quadrant here when I have slow response and small error rate. This, they called it a low arousal state, and this was found for cold colors like purple and blue. So this is the behavioral result. So color indeed affects arousal, and cold colors in particular, they reduce arousal. And by the way, the point 0 here is the point, the responses for black and white backgrounds that were taken as baseline. But again, how is color linked to arousal from the neuroscience perspective and the brain imaging perspective? What happens in the brain, essentially? That's what we're asking for this science, and how by changing color, what would change in the brain? That's what we want to discuss now. And I use, again, another recent study by Tsai et al., where they had a learning task. So the subjects learned some material about a topic, very specialized topic, viral infection. So the subjects were not aware of, they didn't have any knowledge about viral infection. They were presented with some slides that contained information, and then the slides had different colors with the same information. And there was a delay, and learning how well the subjects understood the slides was tested with MCQs, multiple choice. And this is, again, another brain imaging study, not fMRI, but electroencephalography, EEG. And the arousal levels were measured before and after the presentation of these slides of the learning material. So the sum you see here, there was a resting state, eyes open state for EEG. First, the baseline here for 5 minutes, then 45 seconds, the questionnaire for arousal, then 11 minutes of subjects learning the material using different slides and different colored slides, and then another questionnaire, and later there was the test. So what the behavioral effect first is, and this is my last study, I'm getting there. There were 3 conditions, right? Black and white, again, warm, cold colors and warm colors. And arousal before and after was measured with this SAM, this questionnaire. And you see here 3 pairs of bars. The blue bars are before the presentation of the material, and the red bars are after. And we see that there's no difference basically when the material is presented in black and white. There's no arousal, no manipulation. But when it's presented in a colored background, there are differences. And indeed, for the colored backgrounds, both the cold and the warm colors, there's a difference, especially the red bars here are higher than the blue bar in the black and white background. So when material was presented in a colored background, there was more an elevated, basically, arousal level, self-reported. So what happens in the brain? That's the last bit I want to discuss with you. And this is the same study. So people, when they learned, they were also in the scanner, and they were looking at the slides. They were in the scanner. What you see here are electroencephalography, EEG recordings. The dots are electrodes, and you have different frequency bands, so different activity, different sorts of responses for the brain, faster and slower. These are oscillations of, for example, 4 hertz or 6 hertz or for theta, or 10 hertz for alpha. So as you go from delta, from top to bottom for each row, you have faster and faster and faster responses. And this is something we use a lot in computational psychiatry and neuroscience, because each of these bands is associated with a certain cognitive function. So if there is more activity in a certain band, we know that the brain is engaged more in this particular cognitive function. So what is interesting here is, first of all, the red box, where we have the measurements for theta and alpha band, the second and third row, in the warm color condition. So the third row here is warm colors. So the scale here, by the way, that goes from red to blue, what does the colors on this plot denote here is not only the level of activity, but basically if this particular frequency band, this particular cognitive function dominates in this brain state or not. And the way we measure dominance is by whether it sends information to other areas, whether it drives and controls other areas. So if you see red on any of these plots, it means that for this particular frequency band, which corresponds to the row, delta, theta, alpha, this particular area of the brain that is red versus blue sends information and controls all other areas. So what do we see here? We see that for warm colors in the red box, theta and alpha, the frontal areas are more red than the occipital areas. So this means that the frontal areas control basically the occipital areas. And what does this mean? It means that the frontal areas that mediate attention and alertness and arousal effectively are the ones that dominate in the brain and control all other sensory networks like the visual cortex that are found occipitally. So the color effect, that's the result here. So warm colors, what they do is they control and they induce attention effects to earlier sensory areas. And the last result that is interesting is the green box that I have here, alpha, for the black and white background, which is exactly the intervention that we're suggesting with 8. What do we see there? We see that in the alpha frequency band, there are lots of areas that have red. So they send information in the alpha frequency to any other areas. And these, because they're not frontal, they are occipital, if you see here. So they're not towards the nose, which is the top of these plots. So this is state of calmness. And if you have purchased, for example, a wearable like a Motive, and which uses neurofeedback, this is exactly what you are trying to do. You're trying to record online brain activity in the alpha range and induce more alpha, make it more diffuse across the brain to induce a state of calmness and relaxation. So this is what we see here, that if we have black and white backgrounds, we have calmness and relaxation. So that's it, and I'm going back to 8. Thank you. 8, I think you're muted.
There we go. I'm back again. I'm just going to very quickly, conscious of time, so just very quickly sort of wrap up. We have a research proposal that sort of we need to do qualitative testing and quantitative testing and the neuroscience underpinning, which thank you, Dimitris, for explaining that so thoroughly. So the key questions really put to you is how far do changes to the sort of cognitive design of gambling screens change the likelihood of hot state triggering in problem gamblers? You've seen some fairly compelling stuff there from what's going on in the brain. As I say, Dimitris and I are complementary because we approach these things in 2 ways. I can approach it from the commercial side. He approaches it from very much from the sort of the brain side. But do problem gamblers react differently to leisure or non-gamblers when it comes to the presentation of a bleached gambling website? And what reduction in harms could be enabled by a client browser side autonomous intervention, such as a browser plugin? And lastly, will regulators be willing to impose segmented mandates for operator side interventions that rely on very little on their IT changes, that are their former objection? So the key thing for me is I know number 3 is possible. I know it is possible to develop a plugin that could be set to monitor when anybody goes to a gambling website or app and to change the experience to the black and white cohort that we saw in Dimitris's presentation. You can sense it from your just looking at it, but the neuroscience does back it up as well. But this is possible. It removes the power to do that from the gambling operator, from all those things we've seen, are linked to high arousal being a key part of it all. And the summary of this is the clock is ticking because zero-party data extraction could really dramatically increase related harms when they come out during the course of next year. We're going to see much more aggressive tactics from gambling operators because a key source of their revenue has been taken away. And the one thing we know is their shareholders don't like drops in performance. They like it to keep increasing, which is isomorphic with harms in our society. The bleaching does require some robust research, but it's already supported by vast empirical data from the commercial performance marketing world, albeit in reverse. They're using it to sell more, and bleaching is really used to reduce it. And the preventative consumer side operations could easily be propagated without reference to the industry, to the operators. It could be made available just directly online via charities, via citizens advice bureaus, or just direct to consumers in any way. So for us, having learned the harsh lessons the first time round, we think this is a way that could actually make a serious difference to the creation of problem gambling in online environments. And with that, I will leave you with a thank you, and I will just flip you occasionally between 2 looks at this website here and see which one you find more interesting and engaging. I'll leave you with the uninteresting one because I'm sure the questions will be interesting.
Thanks very much,
sorry,
Aid.
we've only got a little amount of time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Aid and Dimitris. It was really, really fascinating, and I think really speaks to the whole importance of looking at the products and design of products and the way that that people engage with them as part of that real approach to preventing and reducing gambling harm. So thank you very much. And we have got a couple of questions in the chat. I'm going to hand over to my colleagues, so Vanessa Marshall and Rebecca Axford, who, thank you very much, Rebecca and Vanessa, for organising the webinar. I'm going to hand over them to take the questions, I think.
Thank you. So the first question to both of you, but I think Aid in the first instance, is a question from Katie Bird saying, thank you very much for your presentation. It's been very interesting. And Katie would be interested to know if the type of device used by the gambler is being considered within the research, or if there is existing research around this, e.g. screen size, distance from the face, etc.
I think one of the interesting things here is the issue of size constancy. Is that you know, we have this automatic way of adjusting size. We don't believe that people walking away from us get smaller, and when they're coming towards us get bigger. So screen size, I think, is actually a different matter from the presentation of colour on that thing. It will be very interesting to actually use different devices, but I think actually it will come more down, the device question will come more down to the ability to access accessibility options to take away that colour, if the research shows that that's a better way of doing it. But thank you, good question.
Thank you.
May I just add that we had a study where we looked at mobile data versus on-screen data, like laptop data, for these gambling environments, and what are the markers that might predict vulnerable individuals. And of course, there is a dependence on what sort of markers and how we can record activity and behavior online, and then identify problem gamblers based on these recordings and these markers. And this is indeed dependent on the medium, right? It's different when you are using or you play a game on your laptop versus a mobile phone. There are many things to be considered there, obviously, in terms of engaging the participant, also recording their behavior.
Yeah.
Thank you both. And the next question from Mizanur Rahman is, again, to both of you, but is gambling behavior genetically transformed into family members? I don't know which one of you wants to take that.
That's beyond me. I'm afraid I have to exit from that one because I have no knowledge of that one.
I mean, there are studies. I don't think there are any genetic studies for gambling addiction. There are definitely studies for addiction or other mental disorders where people looked at both pathological or aberrant behavior reported with questionnaires or with brain scans, different patterns of activity in individuals. For example, people with depression versus their relatives versus other people versus controls, and associating these neural markers or behavioral markers with different genes. For example, there are very well-known genes in schizophrenia, in certain mental disorders, in autism, but not in gambling addiction. But the reason might be that people haven't studied that yet, as opposed to they don't exist.
Thank you. And a third question from Manuel Tranos, one of our challenge co-leads, who says, thank you both, very interesting stuff. And he said he might have missed it, but how can the bleaching be implemented? Will the users need to activate it? And what if they decide to deactivate it? Great
question, really good one, and thank you for asking that, because that actually draws on something really important for this, which is that we know that if you look at the use of the reverse withdrawal buttons on operators, one of the key things with reverse withdrawal is that during a phase post hot state, so somebody moves away from the computer, they start having regrets about how much they've lost, etc., etc., etc. There is a very different approach to what is going on in somebody when they're in a cold state to a hot state of gambling, a high state of arousal versus a low state where the sort of regret and sort of self-loathing might set in. But one of the key things is that what the gambling operators do on the websites is they make it so that somebody who returns, can reverse the action they've already taken. Now, sometimes there is the delay put in there, but the key part of this is it moves it from the operator control. So I showed you partway through sort of the plugins that are available on browsers. A lot of those concern accessibility. So it would be possible to put in on the browser side a way of implementing changes to the screen in front of somebody that will stay in place. Now, it's also possible, of course, to build the timing of withdrawal of that from that plugin. I believe. So in other words, you have to give notice for that to happen. But the key thing is for that person not to instantly be able to override something, to be able to then reverse withdrawal and slip back in again. There are many ways of doing it. Any of us could do it simply by changing the filters on our computer in front of us. There are accessibility plugins doing it, and also if it was a regulatory imposed system, it's a very simple couple of lines of code which could render operators' screens grayscale for users. So many ways to implement, and all of them very, very doable client side. But in terms of the deactivation, point taken, and that's one of the things that would need to have a sort of browser plugin code in to be able to activate that.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Aid. And we're out of time, so I'll wrap it up now. But just a massive thank you to Aid and Dimitris for giving their time today to talk about such an interesting topic. And I'm sure we'll have you back when your research is underway. You've got some findings. That would be brilliant. And also a massive thanks to my colleagues Vanessa and Rebecca for setting up the webinar, and for all of you for participating and for some great questions. As I said, we have recorded the webinar and it will be available on our website, so keep an eye out, because I think this is definitely one that I'll be rewatching, because there was such a lot to learn from it. So yeah, thank you everybody very much indeed, and have a fantastic afternoon.
Great pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Take care. Bye bye.